the young man has exhausted his powers and can no longer summon several superheroes at once. Even so, Mike still has the support of the crying man and, on seeing a plane crashing in the direction of their city, the pair decide to intervene. After using his tears to extinguish the flames from the turbine, the superhero hangs out of the window of the aircraft while Lucy enlists the help of her team to enter the plane and suck out all the smoke that was suffocating the passengers. Just then, the second turbine explodes and Mike is able to think of a plan to save the people. After holding on to Mummy Girl's bandages, the passengers jump out of the plane and Lucy enlists gravity's help to create a zero-gravity bubble and prevent them from crashing to the ground. Meanwhile, Mike and the crying man remain on the aircraft, so the young man summons Sugar to turn the wreckage into a giant strawberry. After saving dozens of people, the youngsters meet Nick at a diner to celebrate the success of the mission, and Mike realizes that he is falling more and more in love with Lucy. While he tries to gather the courage to ask her out, the young woman can only think of looking for her uncle, so they both start to think of a strategy to find Scott, because only he can help them gather all the superhero comics. After the attack by Durko and his gang, the whole world was able to see what Scott's comics were capable of, and now criminals from all over the country were fighting each other to increase their collection, as if they were in a Pokemon battle. With the power of their imagination, readers bring the main character of their comic book to life and the two superheroes begin to fight each other in the name of their masters. Then, at the end of the battle, the losing gang has to hand over their comic to the winner and chaos ensues in San Francisco. That night, two robbers are planning to break into a warehouse when they end up being surprised by the arrival of Camille, the chameleon boy. After defeating the criminal single-handedly, the superhero is called back to his comic book, which is in the possession of a major crime boss. The next morning, while watching the newspaper, Mike and his friends discover that crimes involving comic book characters are on the increase and the population is starting to declare offensive messages against superheroes. However, an anonymous reader decides to give an interview in defense of the super and claims that they are not evil. Their actions depend solely on the character of those who control them. Even knowing this, the police are no longer willing to take the risk of seeing those comics fall into the hands of criminals and start to see superhero comics as real weapons. So from now on, anyone caught carrying one of those comics will be arrested. That day, Mike's class is introduced to a new science teacher called Bob, who explains in class how the process of imagination works in the brain. At dusk, the trio goes out into the city looking for criminals who are using comic books to commit crimes. The youngsters' plan is to reduce crime in order to clear the superhero's reputation before the authorities. Then, while walking down an alley, they spot Tony Two-Tone and his sons attacking two men, and Mike decides to intervene. When he realizes the presence of the intruders, the crime boss sends Camille to attack them and Lucy ends up getting hit. Seeing his friend wounded, Mike calls the Black Knight to join the battle, but Camille uses his invisibility to dodge the enemy's attacks. When she realizes that the Black Knight won't be able to handle his opponent alone, Lucy calls Lucky and Ginseng Man to help him, but Camille manages to escape and even steals the knight's belt. After the poodle is defeated, Lucy orders the Ginseng Man to use his roots to capture his opponent, but Camille manages to dodge all his blows, so Mike summons the crying man into battle. After being hit by the rain of tears, the chameleon boy can no longer hide and is about to be defeated by the locust when a policeman appears and interrupts the battle. At that moment, Tony uses Camille's powers to make his entire team disappear and manages to escape. To prevent their comic books from being stolen, the superheroes need to create a distraction and escape. The trio then meet up in Mike's room. By analyzing the comments on the videos that Nick has posted on his channel, the kids discover that most people don't want those comics in their town anymore, and Lucy is very frustrated by this news. As he walks home, Nick begins to think of a plan to clean up the reputation of superheroes and make them popular again. At this point, the young man realizes that he is being followed and takes a step back, but soon discovers that it is Tara, Mike's mother, who is after him. The woman is a journalist and claims to know Nick's secret. After observing him closely for a few weeks, the woman came to the conclusion that the young man knows the super awesome man and his partner X. These are the code names that Mike and Lucy use when they are on a mission to prevent people from discovering their true identity. However, thanks to the excellent videos that Nick posts on his channel, with privileged angles of all the battles, the reporter discovered that he works with the duo. So she convinces the young man to ask them to do an interview, so they can tell their side of the story. However, Mike is afraid that his mother will recognize him in that costume, so he starts acting strangely when she shows up to start the recording. Luckily, the interview is a great success and Tara doesn't even suspect that her son is the super awesome man. When the woman leaves, the trio discover Camille's location and go after him. Meanwhile, Dr. Tennyson's office is broken into by a masked thief, who enlists Mist's help to steal Professor Z's comic book. When they arrive at the pier, the trio start looking for Camille and Mike is almost hit by an explosion. Thanks to Lucy, the young man manages to get out unharmed and is surprised to see Tony and the chameleon boy being defeated by Krista, who went there to steal Camille's comic. However, Lucy is not intimidated by the gang and summons Ginseng Man to join her team in the battle. After stealing Professor Z's comic, Bob returns home and is greeted by Durko, his new roommate, who is cooking dinner. 6 years ago, after creating his first comic book, Scott began working as a superhero, helping the police fight crime. Ever since the day his life was saved by a hero called Super Scott, Colton has secretly admired superheroes because he knows that not all of them are bad. During the battle against Lucy and Mike, Krista enlists the help of Firehead to attack them and the crying man is almost eliminated when he tries to put out the villain's flames with his tears. Seeing the Ginseng Man in trouble, Mike activates the tear cannon to increase his ally's strength and then the crying man manages to defeat his adversary. When Firehead is defeated, Krista calls Leora to take her place in the battle and the feline begins to hunt her prey. After the Ginseng Man is eliminated, Lucy is attacked by Jelly, but Mike manages to protect her and ends up being hit instead. At that moment, the young man faints and Krista orders Leora to steal the comics, but X calls Lucky to protect them. However, just as the poodle was about to strike her enemy, Camille appears and uses his invisible touch to protect his ally. Since he can't see his opponent, Lucky ends up being seriously injured and returns to the comic book. After losing the battle, Lucy is attacked by Krista to get her to hand over her comics. Just then, Mike wakes up and, seeing his friend in danger, he calls the crying man back into battle. Just as the duel is about to begin, Detective Colton shows up with reinforcements and orders the readers to hand in their comics. Furious at the interruption, Krista asks Firehead to use her most powerful attack to eliminate the policeman, but the crying man manages to protect them with his wall of tears. At that moment, a large amount of mist is formed and Mike faints, so his friends take advantage of the distraction to get him out. While his colleagues search for the masked superheroes, Colton sees the trio fleeing across the roof and is happy to realize that they have managed to escape. When they get home, the group discovers that the wall of tears is a superpower created by Mike, as the attack doesn't exist in any of the original pages of the comic. Upon returning to the hideout, Krista gives her boss the new comics she stole and Super Scott is excited to see the Peel Man comic, as it's one of the 7 Freaks comics. Now, the villain needs to gather the other 5 comics from that collection in order to bring Scott back. The next day, Colton is taking a nap in the police station when his boss approaches and informs him that a robber is committing a robbery at the central bank. When they get there, the officers discover that the criminal is enlisting the help of a comic book character and the creature easily destroys the vehicles. After all the cops have been defeated, the criminal prepares to flee with all the money he has stolen, but his escape is interrupted by the arrival of Skullcrusher. The nerd then begins to provoke the criminal and manages to get his attention. Furious, the man orders 25 cents to teach the woman a lesson and the coin starts spinning in her direction. When she is about to be hit, Skullcrusher calls Harry to defend her. Seeing the giant coin spinning towards him, the superhero uses his hair to capture it and puts his enemy to sleep. Harry then wraps the policemen's bodies with his locks of hair and they all fall asleep, including the criminal himself. Minutes later, Colton wakes up hugging the criminal and realizes that Skullcrusher has managed to escape, but is pleased to be able to take the thief into custody. After stealing 25 cents comic, Skullcrusher goes to meet her group of nerds and they all gather at the home of Papa Princess, a widower who has a young daughter called Aisha. All the members of that team are admirers of Durko and intend to collect a large number of comics so that they can continue the rebellion he started. That day, Lucy invites her friends to her house and Mike brings her a beautiful bouquet of red roses as a present. As he walks through the mansion, the young man sees a photo of Lucy's father hanging on the wall and is frightened, realizing that it won't be easy to convince him that he is a worthy suitor for the girl. Lucy then takes the boys up to her room and asks for their help in finding any clues as to her Uncle Scott's whereabouts. At this point, the young woman appears with a box full of items she found in her uncle's house and the trio enlists the help of Crying Man and Gravity to start the search. While rummaging through the box, Mike finds some discount coupons for a donut store and discovers that, in all the comic books he has created, Scott mentions a store called Dizzy Donut on one of the pages. Searching for the name on Google, Nick discovers that the store does exist and is located in the city center. The problem is that the shop was closed a few years ago, so the trio won't be able to go there to investigate. That night, Bob uses Professor Z's powers to make Durko's mind even more powerful. as he knows he is the perfect ally to put his grand plan into action. The next morning, when she gets home, Tara finds her son with his friends and is surprised to meet Lucy, so she asks if Mike is dating her. However, the interrogation is interrupted when Nick asks about the interview they recorded, and the journalist says that no broadcaster has agreed to air it, because everyone is only interested in the police version. So Nick decides to publish the video on his YouTube channel, as he knows it will have millions of views. After the interview was published, many people joined together to form a group called Supporters of Justice, and Nick reveals that he is talking to a supporter called Rosemary. That afternoon, the trio goes to meet the woman and Nick is excited to meet her, but when he discovers that his crush is an elderly woman, the young man becomes very frustrated. While the group is having tea and cookies in the garden, Rosemary introduces them to Mr. Justice, who helps her look after her vegetable garden. Just then, Papa Princess breaks into the house and challenges the superheroes to a duel against KO, the boxer heroine. Immediately, Mike orders the crying man to hit her with his tear cannon, but her opponent manages to dodge the attack and then knocks out the hummingbird man. After knocking down her first opponent, the girl goes after the crying man and manages to throw him away with her punches. When he realizes that the two superheroes are about to fall on the pepper plant, Mr. Justice immediately springs into action to prevent his garden from being destroyed. Noticing that there is only 1 minute left before the round comes to an end, Colton orders KO to hurry up and defeat his opponents. After eliminating the crying man with a punch, the fighter goes after Hummingbird Man and throws him on top of Mr. Justice. Seeing his lettuce patch destroyed, the superhero is furious and goes after KO. Although he's not a great fighter, Mr. Justice is able to survive any blow. According to Rosemary, this is the power of her superhero, so he manages to stay on his feet until the end of that round and becomes the big winner of the fight when X sends Locust to knock the boxer out with his super-powered kick. After her defeat, Papa Princess flees with the help of Skullcrusher, and Mr. Justice regrets the fact that he was unable to protect Rosemary's vegetable garden. However, the old woman tries to reassure him and says that she will be moving into an apartment soon, so she won't have room to grow a vegetable garden. So she gives Mike the Mr. Justice comic book, and, during a conversation with Rosemary, the trio discover that the donut store has been turned into a pub. That night, after stealing a new comic book from one of the players in the arcade, Timo runs off to find Krista, who is hiding in an alley. At that moment, the young man is followed by 2 members of the Council of Comics, who are there to pick up the comic. Seeing them, Krista doesn't think twice about taking action and throws the pair out of the alley. When they realize that they won't be able to defeat the duo alone, the men call on 25 Cent and 7 Kung Fu to help them in the battle. So Krista and Timo also summon their superheroes to the fray, and Leora attacks the giant coin with her claws. However, as the creature's body is made of metal, it doesn't take any damage, not even after Jelly's attack. At that moment, the feline decides to attack her next target, but 7 manages to dodge all her blows. After being scratched by Leora's claws, the Kung Fu master decides to fight back. While the fighters try to decide who will win the duel, Jelly continues his battle against 25 Cent. When its opponent throws the coin in its direction, the Jelly uses its gelatinous body to rebound the attack and manages to defeat it. Meanwhile, Lucy and her friends go to the pub to talk to Donnie, the former owner of Dizzy Donut. On seeing Scott's photo, the old man reveals that he and his 6 friends used to go to his store every day and called themselves the Dizzy 7. According to Donnie, one day the 7 friends went to spend a night in the forest and 6 of them disappeared. Only Scott returned. The old man says that 6 months ago, Scott came to visit him and started talking about his plan to get the Dizzy 7 back together. But Donnie didn't quite understand what he was trying to say. After that, the pub landlord never saw him again, and Lucy began to worry even more, as the last letter she received from her uncle was also sent 6 months ago. After defeating 25 Cent, Timo orders Jelly to help Leora defeat 7, and the fighter creates another 6 copies to fight alongside him. By uniting their powers, the 7 fighters release the energy of a dragon and, with a single blow, manage to defeat their 2 opponents in one fell swoop. However, this blow also drains all the user's energy and 7 is sucked back into the comic. At that moment, 25 Cent prepares to take part in a new duel against the rival duo, but Timo calls Big Dave to send him back to his sender. That night, Super Scott realizes that his body is disappearing because his reader, Cynthia, is already an old woman and is getting weaker and weaker from using the power of her imagination to summon him. The truth is that, 6 months ago, Super Scott caused the elimination of countless people, so his creator made the difficult decision to imprison him in his comic book forever. But somehow the villain managed to escape and found a new reader to bring him back to the human world. Now, his plan is to collect all the Dizzy 7 comics in order to free himself from his comic once and for all. After returning from school, the three friends meet up at Mike's house and Lucy shows them the Super Scott drawing. The character was the protagonist of the first comic book written by Scott, which tells the story of the young man becoming a hero and saving his 6 friends. After hearing Donnie's words, Lucy understood that her uncle had written that story inspired by what had happened to the Dizzy 7. Just then, the conversation is interrupted by the sound of the doorbell and, on opening the door, Mike is confronted by Detective Colton. The man asks to speak to Tara and asks how the journalist managed to arrange an interview with the super awesome man and X. But the woman says that they are not allowed to reveal their sources. However, the man claims that, unlike his coworkers, he is a big fan of the super awesome man and knows that not all comic book readers are bad. That afternoon, the members of the Council of Comics follow Krista around the city and discover the location of Scott's hideout. After breaking in, Skullcrusher claims that those hero comics are weapons given by the Great Scott and, according to her, the members of the Council of Comics are the warriors chosen to use them. When he hears the woman extolling his creator, Super Scott becomes enraged and uses his powers to attack the gang. After recovering from the attack, the nerds get up and call on their superheroes to fight the enemy, but Super Scott easily manages to defeat them. Then the police show up and order everyone to hand over their comics while Lucy and her friends look down from the terrace of a building. Seeing her uncle fighting the police, the girl is surprised and tries to understand what is going on. However, just as Super Scott was about to turn all his opponents into ashes, Cynthia begins to fall ill and the villain returns to the comics. At that moment, Lucy realizes that this is a character created by her uncle, so Krista and Timo go into action to try to get rid of the police. However, just as they're about to attack the cops, Crying Man shows up to stop them and a real war breaks out. While Super Awesome Man and Eggs try to help the police arrest those criminals, Krista and Timo need to protect Cynthia, because the Council of Comics is trying to steal Super Scott's comic book. At that moment, Cynthia picks up her comic and walks through the city until she finds Detective Colton's car. Believing the man to be a taxi driver, the elderly woman gets into the vehicle and asks him to take her to another part of the city to see her son. Just then, Nick goes after her and tries to steal her comic, but Honey shows up and orders Carrie to take Cynthia back to the safe house. The problem is that the robot hasn't been programmed to fight, but instead starts playing loud music. In this way, Carrie attracts the attention of the Council of Comics and all the members run towards the car. Frightened, Colton accelerates the vehicle to get out of there and ends up being chased by the readers, who are all vying for Super Scott's comic. During the chase, Nick manages to steal the comic book and tries to deliver it to Mike, but the mission is interrupted by Seven. Soon after, Lucy enlists Lucky's help to climb into the vehicle and tries to reach the comic, but Seven uses his clones to build a bridge to KO and the boxer manages to knock out the poodle. Just then, Skullcrusher speeds off on her motorcycle and Papa Princess manages to snatch the comic book from Mike's hands. Arriving at the Golden Gate, Skullcrusher calls on Super Scott to help her get rid of her pursuers, but soon discovers that her imagination isn't strong enough to summon that superhero. Just then, Krista makes a risky maneuver and Timo manages to retrieve the comic. Then X orders Gravity to create a zero-gravity bubble to stop them and Mike sends Sylph to get the comic. Just as the young man was about to bring Super Scott back to life, Carrie sends a missile to blow up Gravity and the bubble is shattered. After retrieving the comic, Honey gives Cynthia a pill and the old woman brings the villain back, believing him to be her son. After eliminating all the superheroes of the Council of Comics with his heat vision, Super Scott is attacked by the Crying Man's tear cannon. At that moment, Lucy introduces herself and asks where her uncle is. Then the character informs her that Scott is hiding inside the Dizzy 7 comic book. In order for him to return, it will be necessary to gather the entire collection. So the villain asks Lucy to hand over all her comics and says he will help her bring Scott back. The man needs his creator to free him so that he can become the hero the Earth needs and get rid of all the wickedness. Upon hearing this, Lucy understands why her uncle tried to get rid of Super Scott and enlists Mike's help to defeat him. However, even after being caught in Sylph's tornado, the man manages to survive the explosion caused by Sparkulus and Toxo. When he sees his friend about to be eliminated, Mike sends Mr. Justice to protect her and the superhero uses his own body as a shield to block the attacks. With just the impact of his punches, Scott throws all the cars that were on top of the bridge into the water, but Mr. Justice remains standing. After receiving 100 blows, the superhero is able to return all the damage he has suffered to his opponent and Super Scott ends up being defeated by his own power. So what did you think of this series? Leave it in the comments below.